Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. I'm Ethan Foster, your resident observer of the human condition, always questioning the little quirks of how we live, love, and occasionally self-destruct.
And I'm Alara Skye, the quick-witted half of this conversation, though some would say the only witty half. But I'm not here to brag about my comedic genius. I'm here to talk about health and the strange ways modern medicine tries to fix our problems.
Right, you're not here to brag. Not at all. Anyway, before we jump in, we've got a doozy of a topic. SSRIs. You know, those antidepressants that supposedly cure all your woes by balancing your chemical imbalances.
Yes. Because when life throws you lemons, apparently you just pop a pill, and presto, no more lemons. No more taste buds either, by the way, because your emotional palate might be the first casualty.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I've seen countless commercials with people dancing around in pastel cardigans, hugging golden retrievers, magically cured by an SSRI. Turns out there might be a few wrinkles in that fairy tale.
More than a few. These medications are widely prescribed. SSRIs and SNRIs are championed as the miracle solutions to depression and anxiety. But real-world reports suggest they can come with side effects that range from infuriatingly inconvenient to downright tragic.
I've heard about the typical disclaimers: potential weight gain, possible digestive issues, maybe some insomnia. No big deal, right?
Well, let's add some color commentary. Sexual dysfunction, emotional numbness, birth defects in pregnant women taking SSRIs, possible severe agitation, mania, and in the worst cases, violent psychosis, suicidal tendencies, and even homicidal behavior. Yes, that's quite the color palette.
That sounds like a pharmaceutical commercial gone horribly off script, the kind where that soothing voiceover tries to downplay the side effects. You may experience a strong urge to paint your walls hot pink and then burn down the house. But hey, at least your sadness is gone.
Exactly. And let's not forget the mass shootings angle. For years, there's been an eerie pattern. Many high-profile perpetrators either had a known prescription or a suspicious prescription history that somehow never quite made it into the final news cycle.
I recall a time when the media openly reported what medications were in a shooter's system. Then it just disappeared from public conversation.
Conveniently vanished. A hush swept over all official channels. But now, there's a renewed willingness to discuss that possibility. And believe me, it's not because the pharmaceutical companies suddenly felt guilty. We're seeing more data come out, and it's forcing the conversation back into the limelight.
Let's talk about the mechanism here. SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, meaning they tinker with how your brain handles serotonin.
Yes, the brain's feel-good chemical. Only it's never as simple as a single switch. It's more like rigging up your entire electric panel to make your living room lights stay on, while ignoring the fact that the bedroom might now short-circuit.
One might say these drugs lift your mood the way a bulldozer moves earth. Sure, it moves the dirt, but your flower bed might be gone in the process.
You're quite the poet. Now, the concerning part is that SSRIs can produce effects eerily similar to stimulants. Cocaine, for instance, can make you euphoric and hyper, or agitated, paranoid, and dangerously impulsive. Turns out SSRIs can do the same, especially if your system isn't a good match.
So you're saying we basically handed out mini-legalized versions of a cocaine-like stimulant to millions of people, then acted shocked when they started showing cocaine-like symptoms?
I'm not sure shocked is the right word. More like willfully ignorant. The data's been there all along.
You'd think we would have been more cautious, but if there's a pattern in modern medicine, it's that caution often goes on vacation when there's a potential for blockbuster profits.
Indeed. Let's go through some of those side effects systematically. One big one, sexual dysfunction. Because what better way to cheer someone up than to take away their capacity for a healthy sex life?
In a twisted sense, it's a brilliant marketing tactic. The same companies that make SSRIs often also have medications for erectile dysfunction. So, first they help destroy your sex life, then they sell you a pill to restore it. It's synergy.
Diabolical synergy, yes. Studies in places like Spain and New Zealand found that sexual dysfunction in SSRI users is widespread, well over half the participants. That's a lot of frustrated, confused individuals who got more than they bargained for when they just wanted relief from a low mood.
Now permanent sexual dysfunction is reported too. That's horrifying. You stop the pills and your system still doesn't bounce back. No refunds, no do-overs.
Another biggie is emotional numbness. You don't feel the lows. But guess what else you lose? The highs. That sense of joy that makes life vibrant. People describe feeling like zombies or robots, as though the color is drained out of their emotional world.
Hard to imagine that helping depression in the long run. I'm not depressed because I can't feel anything at all now. Not exactly a net gain.
And that's the biggest tragedy. Think about how emotional signals help us navigate life. If something is bad for us, we feel anxiety or sadness. If something is great, we feel excitement. When you flatten that curve artificially, you can stay stuck in a miserable job or an unhealthy relationship for years because the drug dulls your survival instinct.
That's the stuff they don't cover in those direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical ads, right? They'd rather show us a middle-aged man on a fishing boat, smiling at the sunrise. Not a mention of him losing interest in, everything else.
Precisely. Now, let's tackle the darker side: psychotic violence, suicides, and even mass shootings. At the extreme end of the bell curve, some individuals can respond catastrophically. It's a real phenomenon, and it was identified in trials long ago.
That begs the question. If it was identified, why isn't it common knowledge? Why did it take so long for this conversation to resurface?
2 words: corporate cover-up, also known as corporate selective omission. Reports got buried, data was reclassified, side effects were blamed on the original condition, and so forth. People assume if they feel worse or become unstable, it's their illness returning. Never mind that it aligns suspiciously with dosage changes.
It's reminiscent of a vicious cycle. You experience agitation from the medication. The psychiatrist says, your depression is worsening, we should adjust your dosage. So you up the dosage, the agitation spikes again, and now you're fully on the hamster wheel.
Exactly. And the mental health establishment, in many cases, denies the medication's role. It's always the patient's condition at fault. That denial has led to a lot of heartbreak and a lot of tragedies.
Now, regarding homicide and suicide events, it's not every person on SSRIs, obviously. But the terrifying potential is there. And if it flips that switch in a small percentage, the results can be, we've all seen the headlines.
Right. It might be a small fraction, but on a massive scale, even a small fraction can create shocking numbers. It also signals that there are plenty of milder, but still damaging reactions happening to more people, just not reported or recognized.
Let's talk about what happens when someone tries to come off these medications. I've heard withdrawal can be brutal.
Very. Because SSRIs are incredibly addictive. Maybe not in the party sense, but in the dependent sense. If you suddenly stop or even lower your dose too fast, your body can freak out. Head zaps, debilitating depression, severe anxiety, uncontrollable agitation. And doctors often don't get it. They wave it off as a relapse, rather than seeing it as withdrawal.
Which leads them to recommend going back on the drug or upping the dosage again. It's a twisted labyrinth. If you do want to taper off, many find they have no guidance. They're left to wing it. That's dangerous, especially if you're dealing with something that can rattle your mental stability.
People can spend years trapped in that cycle. We're only now seeing a push from certain movements, like natural health advocates, for instance, who are trying to offer safe tapering protocols, or at least some acknowledgement that this is a real problem.
Let's pivot a bit. What's happening with pregnant women and SSRIs? I know that's a whole can of worms.
Definitely is. Pregnant women are sometimes told SSRIs are fine, or that their depression poses more risk to the baby than medication. But the data suggests SSRIs can dramatically increase the chance of premature birth, heart defects, like septal defects, and persistent pulmonary hypertension in newborns.
That's an intimidating phrase, persistent pulmonary hypertension. Not something you'd want a newborn to battle right out of the gate.
Exactly. And once again, the official stance is often, the risk is small. But when you're dealing with something that can be fatal or life-altering, even small risks become quite significant.
It's disturbing that these side effects aren't front and center in discussions with pregnant patients. This is the kind of information you'd assume would be mandatory, up there in big, bold letters.
You'd think so. Instead, it's glossed over. Then there's the fact that SSRIs might stunt growth in children if taken during pregnancy. Research shows kids exposed to SSRIs in utero could end up smaller in stature and weight. That's a big deal.
So, from sexual dysfunction to mania to suicidality to potential birth defects. Is there any silver lining? Do these pills truly help enough to justify the risk?
That's where the arguments get thorny. Some folks do find benefit, but the big question is, are we giving these drugs to the right people? Or are we dishing them out like candy at a parade?
If the majority of prescriptions yield mild or no real benefit beyond a placebo, but open the door to a host of side effects, then that's a pretty terrible cost-benefit ratio.
Couldn't have said it better. Some analyses suggest SSRIs are no more effective than placebos for most people with mild to moderate depression. Yet they come with a laundry list of potential harms.
I recall reading that many patients stop using them within 4 months because the side effects are intolerable. That alone speaks volumes.
Yes, compliance rates can be shockingly low, but the conversation doesn't end there. Because once you're on them, if you try to stop abruptly, you could wind up in a crisis. So you're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place.
There's a marketing aspect too. Pharmaceutical companies are masters of spinning the data. They sponsor studies, bury negative findings, and present successful trial results as if the drug is a miracle cure.
Right, and successful is typically measured in questionable ways. Maybe the participant answered a few points better on a depression inventory scale, but we don't hear about the other 50% of participants who dropped out or felt so miserable that they were deemed non-compliant.
We see that pattern in other medications too, looking at certain vaccines. The principle is the same. If we can't manipulate the data, we just don't publish it.
Precisely. Unpublished or misclassified data means the public never knows the real risk, and doctors, depending on their continuing education sources, might be none the wiser. They're taught these are safe and effective, so that's how they prescribe.
Given everything, do you see hope? Is there a genuine shift in public awareness?
Yes, actually. The wave of public scrutiny is growing. You have some journalists and public figures willing to say, wait a minute, maybe SSRIs are not the neat solution we were sold. And patients themselves are speaking up, sharing their horror stories on forums and support groups. That collective voice is becoming too loud to ignore.
It's good to see, because for decades, the mental health conversation was hijacked by a single narrative. You're depressed, you need antidepressants, possibly for life. End of discussion.
Exactly. And that stifled meaningful exploration of alternatives, like lifestyle changes, certain nutritional approaches, therapy that delves into deeper issues, or safe targeted supplementation. Instead, we got a quick fix mentality that ironically left a lot of people in a worse place.
On top of that, each iteration of SSRIs was accompanied by some new marketing spin, but the fundamental mechanism stayed the same, just fiddling with serotonin. We never addressed the root cause of why someone's depressed. We just slapped a chemical Band-Aid on it.
And as with many Band-Aids, if it's not sterile, you risk infection. Here, the infection is everything from mild emotional numbness to catastrophic violent episodes. And let's not forget, people get stuck. By the time they realize the medication is a problem, they may have difficulty getting off it.
The stigma around acknowledging that SSRIs might be harmful is huge. People fear they'll be labeled anti-science or anti-psychiatry if they question the status quo.
True. Which is ironic because real science involves ongoing questioning, retesting, and reevaluating. It's not about accepting the first sales pitch that hits the market.
So how do you see this playing out? Will there be a tipping point where the medical community finally says, we were wrong about handing these out like candy, and begins to rein it in?
Historically, that's how it goes with plenty of misguided pharmaceutical trends. Remember when opioids were once marketed as nearly risk-free? Then came a massive wave of addiction and an outcry that forced some changes. We're in the early innings of that kind of shift with SSRIs. The data on violence and harm is piling up, and more people are pointing it out.
At some point, the dam breaks. But until then, we have a responsibility to talk about it. Knowledge is power, especially when you realize you're not obligated to trust every advertisement claiming a miracle fix.
Exactly. If even one listener out there becomes more informed and either presses their doctor with harder questions or considers safer approaches, it's a win for us.
Let's underscore that the side effects can be subtle or dramatic. People might suddenly realize they're emotionally blunted or disinterested in life, or maybe they develop weird muscle stiffness, brain zaps, or mania-like episodes. The spectrum is huge.
Right, and it's often not immediate. Sometimes you can be on these meds for months, even years, before you notice something is off. By then, it can be harder to untangle. Because the line between what's your original mood issue and what's caused by the meds gets blurry.
The blur is the problem. A person could understandably assume, oh, my depression is just taking a darker turn, when it could be the drug itself fueling the change.
It's a cruel trick. But let's also mention how it's not just about depression. SSRIs are often given for anxiety, PTSD, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, even to kids with ADHD. It's become the Swiss Army knife of psychiatric medication.
So the potential for widespread harm is multiplied across all those different uses. That's staggering.
Absolutely. The hope is that continued public scrutiny will lead to more transparency, better patient education, and eventually, a new standard where SSRIs aren't the first reflex.
Right? We're not in an anti-medication crusade. We're pro-honesty, pro-safety, and pro-getting to the root of the problem. There's a giant gap between short-term Band-Aid solutions and real healing.
And if the Band-Aid might cause catastrophic side effects, maybe that's not a Band-Aid at all. Maybe that's an industrial-strength adhesive you can't peel off. We want to empower people with the knowledge to avoid that trap.
Exactly. Well, that's a thorough dive into the murky waters of SSRIs. In fairness, some people do find them helpful, especially in severe cases. But the overall picture is far more complicated and dangerous than the glossy ads suggest.
If there's one thing I'd like our listeners to remember, it's that they shouldn't feel gaslighted if they've had a bad experience. Thousands upon thousands report similar issues. You're not alone, and you're not imagining it.
And if you ever wonder why the mainstream conversation doesn't align with your personal experience, well, let's just say there are a lot of corporate interests that prefer you stay in the dark.
Yes, but hopefully not for too much longer. The truth has a pesky habit of surfacing eventually.
Agreed. Ilara, any parting words of wisdom before we wrap this up?
Just that people should remain curious, ask hard questions, and remember that an informed patient is a powerful force. And if someone tries to blow off your concerns with, oh, it's just your condition acting up, you have every right to dig deeper.
Well said. Folks, this has been Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, where we peel back the layers on topics that affect our lives at the cellular level, and sometimes unravel our sanity at the societal level too.
I like that tagline. If that doesn't get people thinking, I don't know what will.
I'm Ethan Foster, the friendly neighborhood cynic.
And I'm Alara Sky, the comedic crusader for natural health. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.